Before he became the ultimate Renaissance icon, Leonardo da Vinci was, brace yourself, technically a nobody. Born in 1452 in the tiny Tuscan town of Vinci, yes, that's where the name comes from, Leonardo didn't exactly roll into the world with a silver spoon. His father was a successful notary, his mother, a peasant teenager. And because they weren't married, little Leonardo was marked as illegitimate, basically the 15th century version of a societal shrug. He couldn't inherit his father's property, hold public office, or even get a proper formal education. So, what does this future legend do? He learns to read, write, and absolutely devour knowledge anyway. Self-taught, self-made, and honestly way ahead of his time. By the age of 14, he shipped off to Florence, art capital of Italy, drama capital of the world. He lands as an apprentice in the workshop of Andrea del Verrocchio, a man whose name sounds like a pasta dish, but was actually a major artistic force. This is where things get interesting. Leonardo wasn't just talented. He was that annoying kind of talented where he could do everything better than you. Painting? Obviously. Sculpture? Sure. Engineering? Why not? Stage props, musical instruments, frescoes, architecture, anatomical sketches? Check, check, check. He was like the Renaissance's answer to the gifted kid who never stayed in his lane, and didn't care to. Now get this. Leonardo was so good that legend has it Verrocchio straight up stopped painting after seeing Leonardo touch up one of his pieces. That's how demoralizingly good he was. Imagine training someone, only for them to one-up your masterpiece before lunch. But here's the twist. Even with all that genius, Leonardo didn't rise fast. He spent years bouncing between projects, getting commissions and ghosting them, starting work and abandoning it halfway through. Classic Da Vinci. Florence knew he had talent, but also that he was kind of a flake. And it wasn't just about art. Leonardo didn't fit in with the traditional crowd. He dressed flamboyantly, stayed single his entire life, and surrounded himself with handsome young men as assistants. Gossip swirled. In 1476, he was even anonymously accused of sodomy, an offense punishable by death. Charges were dropped, but the scandal stuck. It was the kind of whisper campaign that could have ended anyone else's career. For Leonardo, it just made him more mysterious. This was the early Da Vinci, fiercely talented, strangely elusive, and already causing ripples that no one quite knew what to do with. He wasn't famous yet, but he was the kind of person everyone talked about, the brilliant misfit no one could quite figure out. And if you think that's dramatic, just wait until he starts designing weapons of mass destruction for Renaissance warlords. Florence may have been the art capital of Europe, but Leonardo had bigger ambitions, and an even bigger flair for theatrics. By the early 1480s, he'd already established himself as the golden boy with god-tier talent and a reputation for being, let's say, creatively unreliable. So, what does he do next? He packs up his sketchbooks, slips on his best doublet, and heads to Milan, the city of steel, silk, and scandal, to reinvent himself not just as an artist, but as a visionary. Now here's where the drama kicks in. Most people would send a portfolio to pitch themselves. Leonardo? He sends a 15-point resume that reads like a Bond villain's dream application. He tells Ludovico Sforza, the Duke of Milan, basically a warlord with a taste for luxury, that he can design bridges, build indestructible fortresses, divert rivers, and invent war machines that make catapults look like pool toys. Oh, and he casually throws in at the end, also I paint, like super well. That was point number 11. Painting came after his plans for armored tanks and flame-spitting death machines. Priorities. Ludovico, who was always one step away from needing a new weapon to crush a rival, eats it up. And boom, Leonardo lands a gig not as a painter, but as a military engineer. Yes, the man who painted The Last Supper was originally hired to design ways to kill people more efficiently. That's Renaissance Italy for you. Art and annihilation in one brushstroke. But here's the thing, Leonardo rarely finished anything. He'd show up with a brilliant idea, sketch out an entire blueprint, then get distracted by a bird's wing, a mathematical puzzle, or some optical illusion, and poof, the project would be left in limbo. The Duke wanted war machines. Leonardo gave him parade floats, costumes for court pageants, and hydraulic fountains that sprayed wine. Basically, Milan hired a genius and got a very glamorous, extremely expensive ADHD episode. Still, he dazzled the court. He wasn't just building things. He was staging theatrical performances that made Shakespeare look like amateur hour. Full sets, pyrotechnics, costumes designed down to the hinge on a fake dragon's wing. Nobles were obsessed. He turned court entertainment into immersive, jaw-dropping experiences. You didn't just watch Leonardo shows. You were swallowed by them. And then there was the horse. Capital T, capital H. Ludovico commissioned Leonardo to sculpt the largest equestrian statue the world had ever seen. We're talking 24 feet tall, solid bronze, absolute Renaissance flex. Leonardo worked on it for 17 years. That's longer than some of your favorite shows have been running. He studied horse anatomy obsessively, built a full-scale clay model, even figured out how to cast the thing in one pour, a wild, untested technique at the time. But guess what? War broke out. France invaded Milan. The bronze was repurposed for cannons, and the horse? Left unfinished. Leonardo's magnum opus? Crushed by foreign soldiers who used it for target practice. Yes, really. So while Michelangelo was chiseling David out of marble and finishing it in record time, Leonardo was, well, sketching flight machines that couldn't fly and pouring his heart into an enormous horse that never even made it out of clay. And yet, even with the chaos, the court loved him. Why? Because Leonardo didn't just create things. He created a mystique. People didn't know what he'd do next. He was unpredictable, flamboyant, brilliant, frustrating, magnetic. The original tortured genius who'd rather chase a new idea than cash a paycheck. This was Leonardo in his Milan era. Part scientist, part showman, part war-tech wizard with a theatrical streak and a serious commitment problem. And as Milan teetered on the edge of war and political collapse, Leonardo was already thinking about anatomy, the soul, and how light moved through water. Because of course he was. By the time he hit his 40s, Leonardo da Vinci wasn't just playing the part of an artist-engineer anymore. He was quietly assembling what might be the most radical personal archive of the Renaissance. Thousands of pages filled with anatomical dissections, impossible machines, philosophical musings, topographical maps, military inventions, costume designs, and what some people swear are secret codes. All of it written in an elegant, left-handed script that went right to left, completely backward, mirror writing. Now, people have speculated for years. Why did Leonardo write that way? Was it to keep his ideas secret? To hide from the church? To make his work illegible to casual readers? Or was it just because he was a lefty and didn't want to smudge the ink? Honestly, it could have been all of the above. But here's the kicker. No one else was doing this. Leonardo's notebooks weren't casual doodles. They were encrypted diaries of a man who saw the world decades, if not centuries, ahead of his time. Let's talk anatomy. While the rest of Europe still believed human bodies were full of mysterious humors and divine substances, Leonardo was out here cutting open corpses in secret. Not one or two, dozens. He would bribe hospitals and morgues to get access to bodies, sneaking into cold, candlelit rooms to sketch muscles, nerves, and organs with terrifying precision. He was the first to draw a fetus in the womb. He diagrammed the human spine, the heart's chambers, the eye's optic nerve, all before modern medicine even dreamed of it. The church? Not a fan. Dissection was deeply taboo, bordering on heresy. If anyone had discovered what he was doing, Leonardo could have been excommunicated, arrested, even executed. But that didn't stop him. He believed the human body was the most perfect machine ever built, and to understand nature, he had to study its engineering. But Leonardo didn't stop with the body. Oh no! He was sketching flying machines centuries before the Wright brothers. Ornithopters with flapping wings, helicopter-style screws, parachutes, gliders, diving suits. Most of them wouldn't have worked, at least not with the materials available back then, but it wasn't about building them. It was about understanding flight, drag, lift, and pressure. Leonardo wasn't just dreaming. He was reverse engineering nature itself. And here's where it gets even more suspicious. Why did he never publish any of this? He wrote volumes upon volumes, diagrams so advanced they wouldn't be understood until the 20th century. But he kept it all hidden, locked away, scattered across dozens of notebooks, never collated into a proper book. Some people think he was afraid of the church. Others think he believed the world simply wasn't ready. And some believe he didn't want to give away too much power. Because when you look at Leonardo's notes, there's something almost prophetic about them. He was asking questions no one else dared to ask. What is consciousness? How does vision work? Can water be weaponized? Could man become machine? He even drafted designs for a mechanical knight. Yes, a freaking robot that could sit, wave its arms, and move its jaw. In the 1490s. Let that sink in. While everyone else was still bleeding patients with leeches and praying for rain, Leonardo was sketching androids. And then, like smoke, his notebooks started to disappear. After his death, the pages were scattered. Some sold, some stolen, some hidden away in vaults. A few ended up in the hands of kings and collectors. Others were lost to time, only to be rediscovered centuries later in dusty archives and private collections. Today, only about a quarter of his known notes survive. The rest? Gone. Possibly forever. Which is why people still whisper about what might have been in those missing pages. Was it just more anatomy and gear sketches? Or were there darker secrets, blueprints for weapons, suppressed discoveries, maybe even challenges to church doctrine? We'll never know for sure. But one thing's clear. Leonardo da Vinci wasn't just documenting the world. He was dissecting its fabric, layer by layer, and hiding the truth in plain sight. And the world still hasn't caught up. Let's get one thing out of the way. The Mona Lisa isn't famous because of how she looks. She's not glamorous, not royal, not dripping in jewels. She's just sitting there, mysterious, mild, unbothered, like she knows something we don't. And honestly, she probably does. Because nobody plays the long game like Leonardo da Vinci, and nobody created a more analyzed, idolized, and scandalized piece of art than this woman with the half-smile. Painted sometime around 1503, the Mona Lisa was supposedly a portrait of Lisa Gherardini, the wife of a Florentine merchant. Cute, right? Wrong. Leonardo worked on this portrait for years, and never delivered it. That's right. The guy who was paid to paint this woman just kept the finished product for himself. He carried it with him from city to city, even across countries. He tinkered with it, touched it up, kept it close like a prized possession. You know how people carry old love letters they can't let go of? That was Leonardo and the Mona Lisa. So, was she just a client? Or was she a cipher for something bigger? Let's talk about that smile. That infamously unreadable, almost smug smile. Is she amused? Is she judging you? Is she in on some cosmic joke? Scientists have studied this expression using everything from digital scans to eye-tracking software, and the answer is, no one can agree. The expression seems to change depending on where you look, how long you look, or even what mood you're in. It's the emotional equivalent of a shapeshifter. And you can thank Leonardo's obsession with optics for that. He didn't just paint the Mona Lisa, he engineered her. He understood how the human eye perceives depth and shadow, and he weaponized that knowledge. He used a technique called sfumato, literally softened in Italian, where the transitions between light and shadow are so smooth, they seem to melt into each other. There are no hard lines on her face, just gradients, haze, and ambiguity. It's not a flaw, it's a design. You're not looking at her. She's watching you. Now, here's where things get weird. There are theories, so many theories, that the painting is a self-portrait of Leonardo in drag. That Lisa was never real. That she was pregnant. That she was dead. That her smile contains musical notes. That her eyes contain secret codes. That the entire painting is a visual riddle meant to mock the church, Da Vinci's clients, or the viewer themselves. At least 2 modern researchers claim they've found hidden letters and numbers in her eyes under infrared scanning. Another group thinks the backdrop shows a real, symbolic map of heaven and earth. Dan Brown? He made a whole career off this. But what's undeniable is this. Leonardo chose to make this portrait his legacy. He could have painted kings. He did not. He could have done grand altarpieces or sculptures that screamed for attention. Instead, he gave the world a quiet, seated woman, half smiling in front of a dreamlike, shifting landscape. A woman who looks like she knows. When he died in France in 1519, the Mona Lisa was still with him. That wasn't an accident. Leonardo left behind hundreds of sketches, unfinished works, and broken contracts. But the Mona Lisa? She was his final word. It's as if he knew he wouldn't live forever, but she would. Not a symbol of status. Not a goddess. Not even a beauty. But an idea. An unsolvable mystery disguised as a simple portrait. The ultimate intellectual flex. So next time you look at her, remember, she's not smiling at you. She's smiling past you, through time, through history, through all the people who thought they had Leonardo figured out. And he's probably still laughing from the grave. Leonardo da Vinci might have been a master of soft shadows and subtle smiles, but don't let the brushwork fool you. His world was anything but peaceful. By the time he hit middle age, Leonardo had more enemies than finished paintings, and the Renaissance was full of sharp elbows, sharper tongues, and egos bigger than church domes. And no rivalry was messier, more personal, or more legendary than Leonardo versus Michelangelo, a feud so bitter, you'd think they were fighting over a Netflix series deal. Let's set the scene, early 1500s, Florence. Leonardo, now in his 50s, has returned from Milan after the French invaded and scattered his workshop. He's older, grayer, and still shockingly unfinished. The Last Supper is already legendary, but it's flaking off the wall. The horse is a national joke. And yet, people still treat him like a living god. Enter stage left, Michelangelo Buonarroti. Young, angry, and already famous for carving David. A statue so flawless it might have made Leonardo throw his sketchbook across the room. The two were oil and water. Michelangelo was rough, antisocial, devoutly religious, and fiercely disciplined. Leonardo? Elegant, witty, a secular thinker who wore pink and was constantly surrounded by beautiful young assistants and half-finished blueprints. They hated each other. Publicly. There's this infamous moment where the two ran into each other on the street. Someone asked Leonardo to explain a passage from Dante, hoping to spark a bit of Renaissance intellect. Before he could answer, Michelangelo swoops in with a nasty jab. Explain it yourself, since you designed a horse and couldn't even cast it. Burn. Leonardo reportedly turned white and walked away. These weren't just artists. These were dueling brands. Think Beyoncé versus Madonna. TikTok Gen Z versus Twitter millennials. Only with more frescoes and probably fewer filters. And then came the battle of the murals. Florence commissions both artists to paint massive battle scenes on opposite walls of the same room in the Palazzo Vecchio. It was supposed to be the ultimate artistic showdown. Michelangelo starts with brutal, muscular soldiers, bare-chested, furious, almost too real. Leonardo? He paints chaos, horses trampling, faces twisted, flags burning. Critics say his composition was electric, wild, and completely new. But guess what? Neither painting was finished. Leonardo's experiment with a new transfer technique caused the paint to drip down the wall. Michelangelo got called away to Rome. In the end, both works were abandoned and eventually destroyed. All that remains are a few copies and a whole lot of art world regret. But it wasn't just rival artists. Leonardo had a complicated relationship with power. He loved being around it, he needed the funding, the attention, but he hated the politics. Popes commissioned him, and then ignored him. Patrons begged for works he never finished. The Medici family, once eager to claim him as their pet genius, grew tired of his flakiness. Even Cesare Borgia, yes, the actual mafia prince from the history books, hired Leonardo to map out war zones, but eventually ghosted him when he found out Leonardo preferred sketching rivers to planning bloodshed. Everywhere Leonardo went, he dazzled and disappointed. He was always almost done, always about to start, always on the edge of brilliance, but rarely delivering on time, if ever. It drove patrons insane. He once took 4 years to paint a portrait and still didn't hand it over. He dissected bodies for years to produce the most accurate anatomical drawings ever made and never published them. He drew a city with a functioning sewer system, clean water, and public sanitation, centuries ahead of its time, and it sat in a notebook, ignored. The fallout? By the time he was in his 60s, Da Vinci's reputation was complicated. He was revered, yes, but also seen as a beautiful mind that never quite cashed the check. Some whispered that Michelangelo had outpaced him. Others called him a failed genius. Leonardo didn't care. He kept sketching, kept dreaming, kept chasing perfection he knew he'd never reach. And then, almost poetically, his final years would be spent not in Florence, not in Rome, but in France, at the court of King Francis I, who treated him more like a prophet than a painter. Leonardo finally had a place to think, to write, to rest. But the fire was fading. His hand, the same hand that once mapped the muscles of the human back, was paralyzed. He could no longer paint, but even as his body failed, his ideas didn't. He dictated thoughts on architecture, mechanics, and the soul. He walked with the king through gardens and debated philosophy. No more patrons to impress. No more commissions to miss. Just an old man, a head full of impossible dreams, and a smile that looked suspiciously familiar. Leonardo da Vinci's final act didn't unfold in the chaos of Florence or under the watchful eye of the Vatican. No, he died in the quiet luxury of a chateau in the Loire Valley, Sleepless, to be exact, courtesy of a fanboy king who basically said, "Come vibe in France and just be brilliant." And that king, Francis I, he didn't just want art. He wanted proximity to greatness. He gave Leonardo a pension, a personal chef, and a home right next to his own castle. It was the Renaissance equivalent of offering Einstein a beachfront property and saying, "Hey, don't worry about the math. Just hang out." By this point, Leonardo was in his late 60s, old by Renaissance standards. His right hand, once so precise it could draw a fetus in the womb with surgical accuracy, was paralyzed, probably from a stroke. But his mind, still razor sharp. He couldn't paint, but he could dictate. He spent his final years writing, organizing notes, theorizing about geology, water flow, the end of the world. You know, normal retirement hobbies. He also kept the Mona Lisa with him, right up to the end. Carried her from Italy to France like a secret he refused to part with. Some say he still made subtle tweaks in those last years, adjusting shadows, refining the corners of her mouth. As if she wasn't just a painting, but a slow-burning idea he was still perfecting until the very end. Then, in May of 1519, Leonardo da Vinci died. The official story? He passed peacefully in his bed at Sleepless. But here's where the drama creeps back in, because someone just had to romanticize it. Legend says King Francis I was at his bedside, holding Leonardo in his arms as he slipped away. A touching gesture, a royal tribute. Also, almost definitely false. Records show the king was 100 miles away that day. But hey, never let the truth get in the way of a perfect ending, right? He was buried in the chapel of St. Florentin, which was later destroyed during the French Revolution. His remains? Possibly lost, or scattered, or reburied elsewhere. Some bones were recovered in the 19th century and reinterred under a stone slab, now marked Leonardo da Vinci. Is it really him? Probably, but not definitively. Even in death, Leonardo remains frustratingly elusive, like he planned it that way. And here's the twist. At the time of his death, Leonardo wasn't even the most famous artist in Italy. Michelangelo was still stomping through Rome, carving tombs and painting ceilings. Raphael had just died young, leaving behind a pristine record of actually finishing his work. Leonardo? He left behind thousands of sketches, a handful of completed paintings, and mountains of unfinished projects. No treatises, no textbooks, no legacy carefully packaged for the public. But centuries later, he's the one who endures. Because Leonardo da Vinci wasn't a man of his time. He was a man of all time. His notebooks weren't dusty journals. They were instruction manuals for a future that hadn't happened yet. Helicopters, robots, human anatomy, city planning, climate systems. He touched it all. And in a world obsessed with productivity and output, Leonardo's genius was something much more subversive. A refusal to rush. He questioned everything, obeyed nothing. He was the prototype of the multidisciplinary mind, the original creator who said, "Why not both? To art and science, math and music, flesh and spirit." And he's still not done. Today, his works are scattered across the globe, his paintings behind bulletproof glass, his notebooks in climate-controlled vaults, his face immortalized in everything from Apple ads to anime. The Mona Lisa alone draws millions to the Louvre every year, and she's still not talking. His Vitruvian Man has been copied onto textbooks, t-shirts, and tech startup logos. His name is a shorthand for brilliance, for mystery, for ambition without boundaries. And here's the part that would have made Leonardo smirk the hardest. We still don't fully understand him. We probably never will. Because he didn't just want to change the world, he wanted to reveal it, and then step back into the shadows while we scrambled to catch up. So yes, Leonardo da Vinci died in 1519. But he hasn't stopped working.